Sometimes classics can feel a bit daunting, but I've been reading kids' classics from quite a young age, and that's then developed into reading a few classics now and then in my adulthood. Hey folks, it's Abby, and today I'm going to be talking about my 5 favourite classics. Now, I'm not going to be including any kind of fantastical classics in here. Some of them do have little elements of fantasy, but basically I'm not including Narnia or things like that. There's one book that has science fiction elements to it. The rest of them are all contemporaries. I'm going to be doing this in approximately the order that I read them in. I don't quite remember which of the first 2 I read first. I read them at a really similar time point when I was somewhere between 7 and 9 years old. So forgive me for those, but the rest will be in chronological order. The first book I'm starting out with is Heidi by Johannesbury. This is a beautiful children's classic about a young girl who lives on the mountains with her grumpy grandfather. She's taken away and forced to live in the town, and she hates it at first but grows to love the town, love the people, but really miss her grandfather. I will say from a modern viewpoint there are issues with this book. I'm thinking ableism. So please go into that knowing it. However, if you go into that with that knowledge and appreciating the book for its time, it's really beautiful. It's such a beautiful story, excluding the ableism. It's a wonderful story about nature and about being outside in the air and enjoying what life has to offer and loving the people around you. This is rich coming from someone who mainly spends her entire life indoors. But it's a gorgeous, gorgeous book. Next up, in a kind of similar vein, and that is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I've not read any of her other books. I know that some of her other books are more popular, but this is the one that I read when I was a child and I adored it. This also has some ableist issues within it. The disability representation is not great, so once again, please beware. Again, similar sort of thing of being out in the fresh air and enjoying nature and enjoying the people around you. Written beautifully. I love the character development in this story, and it just feels like home. In this book we follow a young girl who was living in India when her parents were out there as kind of embassy people for the British Empire, and they die, and she is at first just left alone with the slaves who had been looking after her, and eventually she ends up being sent back to Britain to her only surviving family member. And it's a massive change for her. She had been treated like royalty. She clicked her fingers and got what she wanted. And that does not happen now. And it's seeing her kind of come down from this pedestal that she'd been placed on and become a normal girl, whilst also exploring the world around her. I think they're in the Yorkshire Dales as far as I know, as far as I remember. And also learning more about the people around her and bringing them out of their shells. Then we have Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and I actually didn't read the full edition first. When I was in year 6, so that is around 12 years old, I think, ish. I read this abridged version, I believe by Usborne, and I adored it. It was recommended to me by my English teacher and my form teacher at the time, and it was so beautiful. I loved it. I really related with Jane. It was just such a gorgeous story. I adored it so, so much. Then later on, when I was around 19-20, I actually read the full Jane Eyre. I don't know if I would have loved this story so much if I hadn't read the abridged version first. There's a lot in there that could have been cut down. Obviously the abridged version is especially short, but it could have been shorter, and I can see some issues with it when I'm reading the full one, but the nostalgia of having loved the abridged one as a child will always outweigh that for me, and therefore it's one of my favourites. In terms of what the story is about, we follow a young orphan girl who is taken in by her aunt and uncle, who most definitely don't want her and don't treat her well. She gets sent off to a very strict boarding school, and things start to actually go a little bit better for her there when things change at the school, and then she ends up in the employment of a rich man working as a governess, and things go from there. Next up we have Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which I was forced to read by Caitlin from Mad Cheshire Rabbit, and by the fact that it's on here you can probably tell that I'm very glad she made me. This is not what I expected at all. I expected green, monster, electricity, zap, a highlight of story is monster is alive. Oh my god, it's alive, it's killing everyone. I did not expect a deep delve into the psyche of humanity in the 1800s. So I had not expected what it was at all. It's very much more like a standard classic novel discussing humanity, discussing different actions that are taken, different course of events. Very, very interesting, and I very much enjoyed it. And last but by no means least, the most recent classic that I've read that I'm adding to this favourites list is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. So I think most of you know Pride and Prejudice, but just to summarise it very shortly, it's a classic romance novel where a man in possession of a good fortune is in need of a wife. This I did not expect to enjoy at all. I was reading it just to read it. I just felt like I should at least give it a go, and I'm really glad I did, because I actually ended up really enjoying it. I expected to find this boring, to find this dull, to not be interested in any of the characters whatsoever, and instead I found myself deeply invested in each and every one of the characters. I was there for all of the character development, and now I really like Jane Austen. So that's not what I expected to happen, but I'm not mad about it. And those are my 5 favourite classics. 2 children's classics, 1 that bridged for me at least the gap between childhood and adulthood, and 2 classics that I've actually read in 2021. So Jane Eyre I think I read in 2018, 2019, but I've read Frankenstein and Pride and Prejudice this year, and I loved them so, so much. The main thing I think that has made a drastic difference on how I approach classics and how I enjoy them is reading War and Peace. I keep mentioning this book because I've been reading at least 1 chapter a day, if not more, with Olivia Savannah from Olivia's Catastrophe, so it's on my mind a lot because we're always reading it. We're almost done. By the time this goes up, we will actually be done, and so after every single chapter for the first few hundred pages, after that we started doubling up on weekends and things like that. But for every single chapter, we would have a discussion, each and every day. Now the last time I studied English was at AS level, so that is non-compulsory education from 16 to 17. That's the last time I studied English literature, whereas Olivia just finished her masters. So it was really nice to actually go into this. I'm quite analytical anyway, and to go into this with someone who actually knows what they're talking about and be able to have these discussions and bounce off of each other, me bring kind of the layman's viewpoint to it, her bringing the academic viewpoint, and combined with both of us having kind of this analytical mindset, being able to dissect what's going on, and doing that for 9 months has massively impacted how I read classics, and I enjoy them so, so much more now. Honestly, I didn't expect War and Peace to be life-changing, and the actual book itself, it's fine. I quite like the peace bits, less keen on the political discussions of Napoleon and war in general, but the experience of reading it with Olivia has changed my life. So that sounds really dramatic, but it's true. So I'm looking forward to having a lot more favourite classics in the future. Let me know down in the comments, folks, what your favourite classic is, and if you enjoyed the video, please do hit that like button. In the description box I'm going to have my Bookstagram, my book Twitter, my book blog, and my Goodreads all linked down there as always, and also the trigger warnings for each and every one of these books. I always have the trigger warnings down in the description box, and if you'd like to see some more from me, then please do hit that subscribe button, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye!